through 10. And I apologize once again, I'm reading from the NRSV because that's what my brain defaults to. But you can read it in the NIV or whatever translation you prefer. Thus says the Lord, cursed are those who trust in mere mortals and make flesh their strength, whose hearts turn away from the Lord. They shall be like a shrub in the desert, and shall not see when relief comes. They shall live in the parched places of the wilderness, in an uninhabited salt land. Blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is in the Lord. They shall be like a tree planted by water, sending out its roots by the stream. It shall not fear when heat comes, and its leaves shall stay green. In the year of drought, it is not anxious, and it does not cease to bear fruit. The heart is devious above all else. It is perverse. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, test the mind and search the heart, to give to all according to their ways, according to the fruit of their doings. And our psalm today is Psalm 1, which is a lovely psalm, and it's pretty short. Listen now for a word from the Lord. Happy are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or take the path that sinners tread, or sit in the seat of scoffers, but their delight is in the law of the Lord, and on this law they meditate day and night. They are like trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in its season, and their leaves do not wither. In all that they do, they prosper. But the wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. This is the word of the Lord. Our response hymn is, Lord, I want to be a Christian. And I'll have you stand and get ready as the... No, that's not... No, that's not it. I totally skipped the sermon. It's turn your eyes upon Jesus. Our New Testament reading today from the lectionary is from Luke chapter 6, verses 17 to 26. But I think that we lose some of the nuance in the story if we cut out the beginning of chapter 6. So I'm going to read Luke chapter 6, verses 1 through 11 and 17 through 26. Listen now for a word from the Lord. One Sabbath, while Jesus was going through the grain fields, his disciples plucked some heads of grain, rubbed them in their hands, and ate them. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered them, "Have you not read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and gave some to his companions." Then Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." On another Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and taught, and there was a man whose right hand was withered. The scribes and the Pharisees watched him to see whether he would cure on the Sabbath, so that they might find an accusation against him. Even though Jesus knew what they were thinking, he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come and stand here." So he got up and he stood there. Then Jesus said to them, "I ask you, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to destroy it?" After looking around at all of them, he said to him, "Stretch out your hand." The man did so, and his hand was restored. But they were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. So that's the beginning of chapter 6. And here's today's lectionary text. At verse 17, he came down with them and stood on a level place, with a great crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people from all of Judea, Jerusalem, and the coast of Tyre and Sidon. They had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. And those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. And all in the crowd were trying to touch him, for power came out from him and healed all of them. Then he looked up at his disciples and he said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for surely your reward is great in heaven. For that is what their ancestors did to the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when all speak well of you, for that is what their ancestors did to the false prophets. But I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer them the other also, and from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt." This is the word of the Lord. Please pray with me. God, I ask that the meditations of my mind and the words of my lips this day would be holy and acceptable to you, and be for us a word. Amen. My dad is one of those dads who has a few signature phrases for various occasions, and maybe you had a dad like this. Every morning, for as long as I can remember, when I would wake up, I'd walk past his bedroom on the way to the bathroom that my sister and I shared, and he would shout, "Good morning, sunshine, what's the good word?" And every time my dad would walk into the house from the garage, we had a little door that went from the garage to the kitchen, you could count on him grumpily shouting and kicking shoes, saying, "Whose shoes are in the road?" Every time. I don't even know that there had to be shoes there. And if you were talking on the phone and he was tired of talking on the phone, you could expect that he would eventually say, "Okay, I gotta go cut the grass before it rains." My dad lives in Washington, but it never mattered if there was actually rain in the forecast. It didn't matter whether it was light out or dark out. if you kept my dad on the phone long enough, he would eventually tell you he had to go cut the grass. It's like his way of easing you into a goodbye. When my sister and I were young, if we brought a friend over to play or have dinner, you could count on him to ask the same annoying question every single time. Every time we'd have a friend over, we'd sit down to dinner. The new friend, who was probably really nice, would take a few bites, and then my dad, without fail, would say, "So, what do your folks do for a living?" This question drove me absolutely crazy for two reasons. First, nobody ever knew what he was asking. See, my dad was a lot older than my friends' dads. So sometimes he would use words or phrases that my friends' parents didn't use, and therefore my friends didn't know. None of my friends' parents used the word Davenport, okay, but my dad did. I'm serious, he's in his late 80s now, but Davenport, and people would be like, where is the Davenport? What is the Davenport? None of my friends' parents used the word clodhopper, but my dad did. None of my friends were told that if they wore their jeans to church, they'd look like a crumb bum. But I looked like a crumb bum. And they sure as heck didn't ask questions like, so what do your folks do for a living? So when he would ask, what do your folks do for a living, I would always have to translate. He wants to know where your parents work. The other reason that this question annoyed me was that I assumed that my dad was judging my friends based on what their parents did for a living. I think it's a fair assumption. I figured that what he really wanted to know was how much education they had and what neighborhood they lived in. What do you do for a living? As I've gotten older, I've started to understand why he was asking. Asking what someone does for a living helps you understand what they care about or how they fill their days, how they fit into the world. But if that's what you want to know, what do you do for a living, is an awkward question to ask. Some people are stay-at-home parents. Some people are disabled. Some people are independently wealthy and they have hedge fund managers to manage their living. What he really wanted to know was, what do your parents do when you go to school? How do they make money to feed you? How do you fill your days? What do you do to stay alive? What do you do for a living? That was the question asked by my dad every time he met a new friend. And that is the question that I think our texts today demand of us. Today's texts each present us with two ways of living. And they each beg the question, how do we, as Christians, spend our days? How do we use our time? How do we stay alive? What do we do for a living? In the reading from Jeremiah, we, the reader, are given two options. You can trust humans, in mortals, and yourself, or you can trust in God. Cursed are those who trust in mere mortals and make mere flesh their strength, whose hearts turn away from the Lord, and blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is in the Lord. In the Jeremiah text, you can be a person who trusts in yourself and your own strength, but the person who believes in themselves should be warned. They are like shrubs planted in the desert. They might survive the rainy season. They'll live while the going is easy, but they will burn up once life gets hard and the heat comes. Or you can be like the person who trusts in God. Here, Jeremiah seems to suggest that this is wholly different than trusting in your own strength, in your own abilities. The person who trusts in God is not necessarily weak, but they are the person who knows that they cannot rely only on their own strength. They know that they are not ultimately the one in control. And they are like the trees planted near water, because they know it's not up to them to be strong. They survive even when things get hot and uncomfortable. This text invites us to examine how we will shape our lives so that we will be alive even when the going gets tough. Trust in your own strength, or accept that your strength is not enough and trust instead in God. How will you spend your time? What will be the focus of your life? What will you do for a living? Psalm 1 likewise takes up this theme and offers 2 options for living. I like the Common English Version, and I'm going to read that translation to you. God blesses those people who refuse evil advice and won't follow sinners or join in sneering at God. Instead, the law of the Lord makes them happy, and they think about it day and night. We can follow the advice of the wicked or the sinners or the scoffers. We can trust in our own strength and serve ourselves and our desires. Or we can follow the ways of God. We can make God's will the focus of our lives. We can consider God's laws and demands of us. We can spend our time serving God and our neighbors. Serving yourself or serving God and your neighbors. What will you do for a living? Of course, none of this is easy. I think Martin Luther puts this really beautifully. He wrote once, "Man is by nature unable to want God to be God, for he himself wants to be God." And what he's saying there is, it is our inclination to want to trust our own strength, right? We want to go to the gym and get fit so we can take on the bear, or whatever it is. But these texts are reminding us that when the bear comes, it doesn't matter how much time you've spent at the gym. It's not really up to us. And then we have today's gospel, the blessings and the woes. Blessed are the poor, blessed are the hungry, blessed are the sad, blessed are the hated, the excluded, the reviled, the marginalized, the ignored. For surely your reward is great in heaven. But woe to you who are rich, woe to you who are full, woe to you who are laughing, woe to those who are well liked and always included. I wonder if this passage has ever made any of you uncomfortable. Does it make any of you uncomfortable? This passage has always freaked me out a little bit. I've never minded the beginning part. I like the blessings. I want people who are hungry to be full. I want people who are sad to laugh. I want people who feel hated or oppressed to feel justified. I like that part of today's reading. But the woes are harder for me. That latter part, the second option, that can be off-putting, even scary, for those of us who've never been hungry, who've never been poor, who've never been oppressed, for those of us who've always had some power and privilege and wealth. If you can't tell, I am a white, straight woman. I was born in the United States to parents of European descent who were married to each other, who owned land, who had college educations, and who had good-paying government jobs. I grew up in a Presbyterian household where women had the same rights as men, and everyone had one vote. So I have always felt very privileged. I personally do not know what it is like to be hungry, or poor, or oppressed. I have never been discriminated against. So I used to read this passage and others like it and think, well, crumb. I'm rich in this life, so I guess I will be poor in another. I'm blessed in this life, so I guess I'll be cursed in the next. So what should I do for a living? Just to be clear, in my head, that probably is not as censored as that was. It has a little more colorful language. But it's a real conundrum for me. What does it mean if my comfortable life now means that I will be uncomfortable? So I've wrestled a lot with this text. And I've found that, of course, as in all things Jesus says, it's not quite that simple. This text is not about whether you have money in your bank account to pay the gas bill or whether you have food on the table. None of this text is speaking directly to the question of how you make money to feed your kids. In case you weren't aware, capitalism was not the predominant economic theory or preference when Jeremiah and the Psalms were written. And I don't think that when Jesus said, "Woe to you who are full," he thought we should all quit our jobs, stop eating, and stop heating our homes. Now, I know there's a lot of texts in the Bible that suggest that, but if we read them a little more carefully, there's a different way we can understand them. Instead, this text is asking what we do for a living. But it's not simply about how we make our money. It isn't just asking where we go to spend the day while our kids are at school. It's not just about how much money we make or what neighborhood we live in. It's about how we orient our lives, how we spend our time, what we do in our living. Today's gospel text presents two types of people. It's a theme, see? The people who were in power, the Pharisees, they are rich and powerful and privileged. In today's gospel story, they spend their time trying to trip up Jesus so that they can accuse him of doing something wrong. They are well educated, and they have power in their churches or communities, and they have come to trust in themselves and their interpretation of the rules. And in the process, they've put their needs above the needs of their neighbors. The hungry disciples, the man with the crippled hand. The Pharisees have made following the letter of the law more important than honoring the spirit of the law. They have sat in the seat of scoffers. And then, on the other side, we have the poor, the oppressed, the outcast, the marginalized. We have working class disciples who eat grain when they are hungry. We have a man with a crippled hand who wants to be healed. The people who have come to hear Jesus and be healed from their disease. These are the people that Jesus has come to serve. And he confronts the Pharisees, and when he does, he's asking, what will you do for a living? Where will you focus your energy? And he's asking us, what will we do for a living? How will we spend our days? Where will we focus our energy? What will we do while we're living? We have two choices. We can be like the Pharisees, who used the letter of God's law to keep people out, or we can be like Jesus, who used the spirit of God's law to invite people in. Of course, this text is not just spiritual, it's also practical. And for those of us who do live in a world shaped by capitalism, we should ask how this text applies to how we make money for our living. The question of how we orient our lives doesn't end at the doors of this church. It doesn't end at the doors of our house. If time is money, it's not only a question of how we spend our time, it's a question of how we gain our currency. What will we do for a living? Will we make our lives about our work and our success? Or will we make our lives about our neighbors and their success? Will we worry only about our bottom line, about our bank account, about making sure that we're okay? Will we always look for the best deal or the cheapest option, even when it causes someone else to suffer? Or will we spread our wealth? Will we redistribute our money and our privilege? Will we share our food and our healthcare and our housing and our job opportunities? Will we democratize the world so that those who are hungry and poor and marginalized and the outcast have the same chance as we do of making it? Will we make sure that everyone has the same opportunities to go to school, to get a good paying job, to build generational wealth, to live on a thriving planet? See, the problem with the Pharisees was that they had access and they didn't want Jesus to give other people access. They used the law to keep some people out, and Jesus is using the law to invite everyone in. We only get one world and one life. And there is a lot of snow falling out of that roof. I can see that it's very cool. So our question today is, will we serve others or will we serve God and our neighbors? What will you do while you're living? We're going to